the string, pull the string!
Scoodly, wow, wow, wow.
Bay Area Backstage.
Bay Area Backstage on location at the Big WoW Comicfest. This program we showcase art director, magician, designer, escape artist, musician, the graphic prince of darkness, Jim Steranko. We joined the panel in progress. The topic is escapes.
And I used to put locks in vices to hold them tight. And I'd take my tools, tension tools, lock picking tools, and in the course of picking, I would try to put myself, the entity that I was, my heart, my eyes, my mind, my soul, into the lock, like I became the lock. And I believe that that increased the sensitivity as I was picking, because you have to pick so that the pins hit what's called a shear line. And when they're all even, for example, in some of these locks have 5 disc or pin tumblers, when they're all even, the lock opens up. And I tried to become the lock, or see in it like Superman, you know, like X-ray eyes. I tried to feel that, and I think that helped me along the way. I told you it was crazy, didn't I? But I believe that helped me along the way. Story. Want to hear a story? An escape story? What? Yeah. That's a little hard of hearing today. Around yes. I did a lot of dangerous stunts. The most hazardous of them was underwater. I was also buried alive underground. I can tell you about this. I used to practice this at a stone quarry where there was a lot of sand. They let me come in. I don't even know why they did this, because they were leaving themselves open to real serious liability. But I used to practice by being buried under sand, because there's, you know, rock is one thing, but air can get through rocks, but sand seals it. And I practiced holding my breath for a long time. And eventually, I hit that 3-minute mark. And this was the stunt. I used to do this between baseball games at stadiums. For entertainment, we take like this, you know, 20-minute shot. I'd come out. It's the only time, as a matter of fact, that I wore a costume, you know, kind of similar to Mr. Miracle, but it was not similar to Mr. Miracle. I wore black riding boots. I wore black riding pants. I had a black T-shirt on with a white skull and crossbones, silk screen on the back, and a black hood without eye holes on it. I would have the baseball team members come out, all of them, and dig a 4-foot grave right in the middle of the baseball diamond. And without the benefit of a coffin, I would go right into the grave, face down, and they'd fill it up with dirt. And the point was to stay alive 15 minutes without air. I'm here. I'll tell you how I did it. Want to know? I developed this along the way while I was increasing my breath-holding time. I began to develop this aspect of what I call slow breathing. And it was slow breathing. But more than that, I was able to go into a state of what I believe was similar to suspended animation, where all of my bodily functions dropped down, you know, to like 0, like I was a locust. on a 7-year stretch. I controlled my breathing, my pulse rate, my thoughts. I would kind of go into a kind of sleep state. And this is what I did. This is my first secret. When I got into that grave, that's the t-shirt, I put my arms in this position. See how I put my elbows together? I created a triangle of air that I put my face in. And that was my reserve. I knew from practicing at the quarry that I could easily get to 12, 13 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes. And as soon as they would start to fill up that grave, the clock would begin. As soon as I was covered. Now, they kept piling on dirt, 3 more feet of dirt, 3.5, 4 feet of dirt. And I can tell you this, my friends. The sensation of what happened during that 15 minutes was positively paralyzing. First thing is, you're aware of a kind of darkness. A darkness that you may never have known before, because it's not like walking into a dark room or going out. It's not like that at all. Everything is hermetically sealed. It's as Stygian as it could possibly be. And if you have any phobia about darkness, you never want to try this one. And the next one is the weight. I really don't know what it was. I never bothered measuring it, but I would bet you that I was under at least a ton of dirt. It was so oppressive that I could not flex a muscle. I couldn't move a finger, nothing. That's real torture. Sitting still for 5 minutes, but for 15 without being able to move a muscle. And the third thing, heat. The heat of my own body compressed under a ton of dirt in this small space was so oppressive that I'd be covered with sweat in a matter of minutes. And while that was going on, I had to lower all my bodily functions and go down beneath consciousness so that I could survive. No tricks. I just did it. And as you can see, I'm still here. We all know Jack Kirby, the warrior god of comic books. I dedicated my history comics to Jack, and I said, without whom there may be no comics to write a history about. He really was Mr. Comics. There'll never be another one like him. We were out at dinner one night in Manhattan. And there was a question that always vexed me. You know, every comic book company, you guys know comic history, every company had their token magician, right? DC had Zatara, and Fawcett had Ibis, and Timely, or Atlas, or Marvel had Blackstone, the magician, who was the real thing. But they all companies had their token magicians. And since Jack was Mr. Comic Book, I asked him this question. Why? why was there never an escape artist in comic history? I mean, it's a natural because escape artists do dangerous things, but magicians pull rabbits out of hats. You have to be a big rabbit to be really dangerous. Excuse me to the story. Well, Jack couldn't answer that question. He didn't know. But he liked the idea. And he said, why'd you mention it? Now, I had been a long time a regular guest out at the Kirby's place. I knew the family. I had eaten out there. I used to do magic tricks for the kids to earn my dinner. But I never mentioned this aspect. And I told Jack that I used to do some of these escape stunts. And I could see Jack's eyes light up. He said, tell me more. I began to tell him stories like this. And at the end of the evening, something happened to Jack. He became completely alive. And I was wondering what this was about. And he said, can we talk more about this? He said, I'd like to. And I said, look, I'll send you a book. I wrote a book one time on some of my escape technique. Things I've been talking to you about here, but this was, how it was done, the tools, the techniques I developed. And I sent it to Jack. When I went home, I found a copy of it, sent it off to Jack, and that was it. I heard from him again. Months went by. Months. And about a half a year later, I was in Carmine Infantino's office in D.C. Carmine was president at D.C., and we were talking, if you go over to the competition to see what the hell's going on over there, Marvel spy. And Carmine had this huge desk. And he had his feet on the desk, and he was smoking one of these illegal Havana cigars. He had a whole box full of them. And he started to chuckle, and I said, what's so funny? And he reached down into a desk drawer, pulled out a piece of paper, and he scaled it across the desk to me. And it was a cover proof, Mr. Miracle #1. And he said, that's you, Steranko. So I think one of my claims to fame is that I could be the only artist writer in the comic business that actually became a comic book character. And every escape artist, this is my claim, is based on me. Because who the hell else did it do? A little escape story. I was at an amusement park. I had a 3-day gig. And it was a beautiful place. I remember that with lots of good concessions and rides. And they had a huge Ferris wheel. And I took a look at this thing. I got this idea. I went to the manager and I said, I think I can do a PR stunt that you can cover and use to draw people in here this weekend. Oh yeah, what's that? I said, I will escape from that moving Ferris wheel. You gotta be kidding. No, I think we can do it. We can do it tonight. So just after sundown, they pulled their big spotlights up. They had a PR system playing music, and the spotlights were like trailing over this huge Ferris wheel, one of the biggest I've ever seen. And a flatbed truck pulled up, and we got, I think, a couple of state policemen to tie me with rope. Stop the wheel, they tied me with rope on the structure of the wheel itself, the outside structure, not the inside crossbars, but on the perimeter of it. Tied me up with rope. in a certain way, this epitomized my career, because there were really two aspects. There were my stage work aspects, where I have a certain act that I do, you know, like opening those locks and so forth. And my challenge career, where I would challenge people to bring up anything. I had a $1,000 challenge that I could get out of anything that anyone would lock me up in or restrain me in. I can tell you this, I didn't even have $1,000 when I was. So I had to come across. Anyway, the state cops tied me up on this Ferris wheel, and they set it in motion. And I let it revolve twice. You know, swerving around and all of that. You know, that's just a little misdirection, a little showbiz, you know, a little tension, that's all. Spotlights were on me all the time, music playing. And then at the next revolution at the top, I began to work, really work. And I undid a couple of prime knots that I was tied with. Now the rope was heavy, and it was long. It was one long piece of rope. This was to my advantage, can't tell you now, but take my word for it. The thing about challenge escapes is that there's no practicing them. Like my prison escapes. There's no practicing. You just do it. Underwater escapes. There's no practicing. And not that I didn't practice underwater, don't get me wrong. But I mean, you know, under those circumstances, it's do or die. So I'm up at the top of this revolution of the Ferris wheel, and I'm undoing the knots, and I'm thinking, you know, this is a simple thing to do. By the time it goes for another revolution and a half, it'll be down and I'll be able to jump right off. You know, hold on to the struts and just jump off. It didn't work out quite that way. As I undid the knots, I told you it was one long piece of rope. The rope just uncoiled and let me go. And I didn't count on that. I was an acrobat already, and maybe this had something to do with it. I'm not sure. But it just let me go into midair, and easily it was 60, 70 feet above the ground. And it happened so suddenly there was nothing I could do about it. And I fell about 10 or 12 feet, and miraculously, luck kicked in, because I fell into a car that was just, you know, one of the seats that just happened to be like, you know, revolving at that moment. And I can tell you, it hurt like a bitch. I was cut up. I was cut up pretty severely in that contusions, lacerations, you know, but not so much that when I got off, I couldn't take my bows. and applause, spotlights, and the manager runs over. Jim, that was fabulous. Can you do it again tomorrow? No, I can't.
So after that, you wanted a real challenge, and you went to comic book. So yeah, fortunately for all of us, rather than being the next Houdini, you became the first Steranko. And I think we've got time. If anyone has any specific comic book questions, we've got a little time for that now.
I think this is really a great group. And I got to tell you something. I believe in this. There are, I don't know how this happens, but often I see this on the floor, and I make note of it, and I do what I can about it. But there are many creators that come to these shows and they have great disdain. You can see it in their eyes, in their mannerisms. They have great disdain for the people, and you know that they're like they don't want to be there. And you know what the hell they're doing there, I don't know. Like David Carradine was one of those guys. I cornered him one day because we were both at a show together, and he looked like he was having the worst time of his life. Like people were handing him $50 bills to, you know, sign a piece of paper or whatever. And I went over and told him about it. I said, "You're spoiling it for the rest of us. You shouldn't be here. You ought to get the hell out of here, you know, before you're lynched by somebody." But you've seen this happen at shows already. This is what I do these shows for one reason, and that's because you're the guys who put me on the map, and I have enormous gratitude for that. It's an amazing thing. I don't know if Andrew mentioned this in the beginning. I don't really understand what all this is about. I mean, I look at my work and it's as bland as it could possibly be. I don't get it. I don't get it. I can tell you this. I have not one single image, no paintings, no pictures, nothing of my work hanging in my home or my studio. I never want to see it again as long as I live, because I know what a bad artist I really am. But I like to do these shows because you're the guys that put me on the map. You're like my brothers. And if you come to my Twitter gig, you know, on Sunday at 10 o'clock, if you're on Twitter, or even if you're not, join Twitter. It costs you nothing. 10 o'clock on Sunday, I'm usually there. It costs you nothing. Come in, type in one word. I am Steranko. And you'll meet a whole bunch of people, you know, exactly like us, who love the things and hate the things, you know, that we do, and we mix it up. We talk about. Do I have any of those henchmen here? Raise your hands. Anybody? All right. All right. Well, keep it in mind. Questions? Yes,
yeah,
blue shirt.
When you started out in comics, weren't you working with Joe Simon?
You want to hear that story? I was at a comic convention. I came up to this New York second comic convention. Dave Kaler had one in 1965, I believe in 1966. I went to one that was wrangled by Phil Sulik. Phil Sulik started the direct distribution business, by the way, so you know that's a name that could, you know, should resonate. And I was just selling off my comic books, but I had taped in back of me on the wall in back of my, you know, my stock, a small drawing about this size, smaller than maybe a cigar box lid, of a gladiator. And around that time, and previously, I had spent some serious effort and time as a fencer. I liked fencing. I also had a brown belt in judo. But I particularly liked fencing because I had the advantage. I had the advantage, particularly of speed and accuracy. And of course, anybody who was much bigger than I am is a much bigger target. Naturally, you know, that would put them, you know, in a negative area. You get it? So, you know, this was my métier. And I've often wondered how the hell those knights, you know, in full armor, you know, which must have weighed a ton, how could they even move, let alone wield a sword in battle, right? I don't get it. So I created this gladiator that had a half a suit of armor on the left side where he could parry blows of his opponents and strike back with, you know, a free side, that was unencumbered by armor. Joe saw this drawing and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "That was just an idea that I had. You know, it's really nothing." And he said, "Do you know comic books?" And I said, "A little bit. I know who you are, for example." And we talked for a couple of minutes, and he said, come out and see me tomorrow, Sunday. And he gave me his address out in Long Island. I went out to see him. Joe said, I'm creating a new line of books for Harvey Comics. I'd like you to write for us. Do you have any characters? Well, I can tell you that when I left Joe's place, within 15 minutes, I had a half a dozen characters in mind. I went back, I did a page of each of them, showing them, doing an action figure and a kind of block of copy, and I sent them off to Joe, and he accepted them. So I wrote, Joe had me write the scripts for these characters. And along the way, I said, Joe, look, do you think it might be okay if maybe I actually drew one of these? And in his infinite wisdom, Joe said, you can't draw. Okay. So that was my Joe Simon period. And believe me, he was tough to get a buck out of. I had to threaten to send a couple of Greeks up to his place and grab his legs and make a wish before I could get anything out of Joe. Moreover, and I had Joe, Simon and Kirby, throughout the time I was a kid, great Simon and Kirby team. I held him in great esteem, but he treated me like scum. He even sold those drawings, which he never paid for. The drawings I told you about, he sold them. Never gave me a cent. Well, anyway, I was so disillusioned by this. And I happened to mention it to my friend Wally Wood. You know Wally Wood? Arguably the greatest artist in our field. And a great inspiration to me. And Woody said to me one day, we were in the studio, and he said, you have to draw comics. It has to be part of your history. You're not going to die before you're in the comic book business. At the time, I had 2 other jobs. I was a full-time art director at an ad agency, and I played rock and roll 2, 3, 4 nights a week, sometimes out of town locations. So I didn't need any more work. Wally said, I'm going to set up an interview with the publisher of Tower Comics. Remember Woody was doing Thunder Agents? Remember Thunder Agents, Dynamo, so forth like that? The guy's name was Harry Shorten. And if that name rings a bell, Harry had spent decades writing this newspaper strip and drawing it called They'll Do It Every Time. Very funny. It's very good. And I took some material over to show Harry. I'll never forget this moment because he had the biggest office I've ever seen in my life. It was like a baseball field. I had to take a taxi cab from the door over to the desk. When I got out, the rug was so thick it tickled my ankles. I believe it was like a scene out of Cash McCall. And Harry looked at the stuff and he said, you know what, I like this. I like this material. He said, you and Wally Wood have one thing in common. What's that, Harry? You both have a 52-page book. Now do it justice. Dumb kid walks in off the street. All of a sudden, he's got a 52-page book. And the character that I showed Harry was Super Agent X. So I went back to the studio, and I do this. This was killer. Because I'd work all day long at the ad agency, and I'd start late. I'd start maybe in the 9, 10 o'clock area, and I'd work until 7, and I had a bunch of guys under me, older guys, all of whom hated me, for good reason. And then I'd go home, get a bite to eat, I'd get dressed, and go out and play the job. And those jobs were often like, let's say 9 to 1, something like that, 9 to 2 sometimes, and then there might be travel back. So I get back to the agency at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I draw my comics. Then, after daybreak, around 7 o'clock, I drive home, sleep for a couple of hours, and then come in. And often didn't get to sleep at all because it was just too busy. That's a regimen I've maintained to this very day, by the way. And I did 20 pages of Super Agent X Origin and brought them up to show Harry Shorten. And Harry looked at the pages and he looked at my cover comps and he said, I like this. He said, from this point on, you won't be dealing with me. You're going to be dealing with my art director, Sam Schwartz. He said, you know, you and I started this ball, but now I'm turning you over to Sam. I'm cool with that. So I went over to Sam's office. Sam had previously been art director at Archie Comics. So he knew his way around. And I turned my pages over to him, and he's looking. And the office was small. It was smaller than the telephone booth. I've never seen an office this small before. And he's standing up, and he's looking at these pages, and he begins to shake his head like this. Shake. And I'm wondering, what the hell did I get into? And he points to this, and second page, points to this figure. He said, I don't like the shape of this woman's nose. And I'm going like, me? What could this be about? I said, and I modeled her on Kim Novak. You know Kim Novak, one of the world's most beautiful women? Very cool, right? Very cool. How can you do better for a lady scientist than Kim Novak? You can't. I don't like the shape of her nose. I said, well, wait a minute. Are you suggesting that I give her one of those Betty and Veronica noses? And he said, yeah, I think I'd like that. And he continues to go through the pages and, you know, with these kind of off-the-wall critiques that I'm not understanding. Now, I happen to be an expert on communication. That's the way I make my living. But I don't get what the hell's going on with this guy. And finally, he gets close to the end of the book. I'm not making this up. There's a punch. That our hero throws and decks 2 guys. And the punch was like this. Okay? And Sam says, nobody can throw a punch like that. I spent 3 years boxing, so I know exactly what kind of punches can and can't be thrown. This is a comic book punch. Of course it is. Taking 2 guys out at once. I mean, it's comic book. And then I figured it out. He wanted to put me through his flaming hoops to let me know that he was the boss. He was the king. I was just a slave. That's what it was all about. Nothing to do with the nose. He was training me. And I thought that was terminally disagreeable for a stranger to treat a kid, you know, who needed to be helped and coached, nurtured along. Instead, did the opposite. Now, I told you the room was small to begin with. But another moment, I was toe-to-toe with him. He was holding the pages. And I grabbed his wrist right here. And everything I do is with my hands, my very strong hands. And I dug my fingernails into his wrist as hard as I possibly could. And I could see the blood just drop right out of his face. And I said, don't say another word. Not one. because I would have had him down on the floor with a right hook in a moment. He shut up. And I said, you find yourself another artist. And I left. How dumb can you? I had a 52-page book like Wally Wood. I just blew it. Who writes this stuff? Who thinks this stuff up? What was I going to do? This was uptown. This was about 60th and Madison. I went down about 5 blocks to Archie Comics. And do you remember what Archie Comics used to be before, what they were called before they were called Archie? MLJ. I want to do another hour here. They'll be there. MLJ, the J in MLJ stands for John Goldwater. And John was there that day, and he looked at my pages, and he said, I love them. I'm thinking, all right, Agent X found their home. He said, no, I want you to draw all of our covers. John, come on, Agent X. He said, no, we have plenty of characters. We don't need that. I said, well, thanks, but I'll pass. And I went down to D.C., and it was at lunchtime, and nobody was there except Murray Boltinoff. You know Murray Boltinoff, one of DC's editors, an old-timer, really knows his stuff. He got me, looked at the X pages, and he said, you're working for us. I'm thinking, great, Agent X is at DC. And he said, no, we have Batman. We don't need this. He said, but we'd like you to write for us. Oh, Murray, thank you so much, but I think I'll pass on that. And then, and I can't tell you exactly what my thought processes were right now. I'd have to think about it, but I went to Paramount Pictures. If any of you are New Yorkers, you know the Paramount building at Times Square, 44th and 7th Avenue. You know that building? The whole square block, the Paramount building. And I went in, and I talked to their receptionist, and I said, I want to see somebody who's responsible for animation series. And this woman said, would you like, and Ralph Bakshi was there, by the way. That day I met Ralph Bakshi, whom you all know. And she said, would you like to see Seamus Culhane? I don't know if that name rings a bell with you, but Seamus Culhane is one of the most respected animators in the business, and really great. And he laid all the pages down on the floor like, like storyboards. And he walked back and forth, and he said, you have a Saturday morning TV series here. Bam! So he said, come back in 2 weeks, and we'll begin negotiating the contract and so forth. Like I said, I want to keep these cover designs here and put it up on my board, and so I can keep thinking about it. Well, hey, Super Agent X found his home. It was 4:45. I still had 15 minutes to get into trouble. A nice guy like me. So I took a cab over to Marvel, 5 minutes to 5. I walked into the office, 7th floor, and there was fabulous Flo Steinberg. And boy, she was really cute. Really cute. Mini skirt, great legs. Flo. All right. So I walked in and I said, I'd like to see Stan. She laughed in my face. What's so funny? She said, nobody sees Stan. Well, hey, I had come a long way. I had come from Tower to Archie, to DC, to Paramount, and now I was at Marvel, and I took my pages, and I grabbed her wrist, and I picked up her arm, and I put the pages underneath, closed her arm, and I said, Stan will see me. And she was kind of stunned. But she went away and came back a minute later, and it was like she'd been hit in the head with a ball-peen hammer. And she said, Stan will see me. And she had no pages. Huh? Good sign, right? No pages. So I went in, and it was the cleanest office I think I've ever seen. And Stan was sitting in this nice leather chair, he had his feet up on the desk, and he was looking at the pages, and have a seat, and we spoke. We chatted for about 15 minutes. Not about comics. Isn't that strange? We talked about the things we liked. He asked me where I was from and who I was and so forth, and I asked him who he was and where he was from, and we split that information between us. And at the end of about 15 minutes, he said, you know, this work is really crude. But, you know, Bud? You know what I mean? When you get that but? And I'm saying, well, but what? And he said, but it's got something. Are you going to keep it a secret? You know, or make it public. What is it? He said, it's got energy. He said, I can use that energy. I said, well, what? What do you mean? Give me an idea. He said, well, I'm not sure because all of our books are taken. Everybody's working right now. I don't really have anything for you. He said, but I know as soon as you leave here, see, I didn't tell him my history of that day. He said, I know as soon as you leave here, you're going to go over to D.C., and then you're going to be our competition. And I cannot afford you to be our competition. He said, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break the principle. And he turned around and he had a rack, magazine rack, with all the monthly books behind him. And he said these two words that changed pop culture history. He said, pick one. And I found this book called Strange Tales with the S.H.I.E.L.D. series that had dropped down to rock bottom and didn't make a damn bit of sense. I knew that that had nowhere to go but up. And I said, I'll take this guy with the cigar and the eye patch, and the rest is history.
Destroy the humanoid. Intruder alert, intruder alert. Intruder must not escape.